I'm depressed. I'm eating emotionally, and I'm ready to give up. I was this far from suicide. Really, I just was at a point where after the life I'd had and all the work that I'd done and all the successes and the money I'd made, and the mansions and Rolls Royces and my own airplanes and a yacht 53. I had a life like people only dream of, and only to keep losing it and having to start over again. I said, that's it. I'm 67. I don't have another start left in me. And my kids came to the rescue. I'm not ashamed to tell this story. My son came over and he said, I can't stand to see you like this, Pop. He said to me, you're the strongest man I know. I said, not anymore.
Hello, friends. We are here. It's the Carnivore Rabbi, here to meet, pray, and love. And boy, are we in for a treat today. I am with one of my heroes and teachers and top YouTuber in the carnivore space, old guy carnivore, Mitch. And I bet you've seen him before. And if not, you're going to want to continue after our conversation to learn from him, because he presents carnivore, the carnivore diet, and what we do in such a profound, compelling, and persuasive way. And we're going to hear Mitch's story. We're going to hear how he discovered carnivore and how it fits with the research he's done and the message that he has taught to so many people. Mitch's story is an amazing one, and I am so honored that he accepted my invitation to be interviewed. And so, Mitch, can you tell me your carnivore story? How did you discover this way of eating, and where were you coming from when you discovered it?
Oh, God, Evan, I don't know if I can follow an introduction like that. I'm quelling. I never thought I'd be talking to a rabbi like this. The last time I talked to a rabbi, I was 13 years old, but that's okay. All right.
Just a decade ago, right? 13 years.
Yeah, a decade ago. Yeah. I may look like I'm almost 80, but I'm only 35. It's been a rough 35 years. My carnivore story is actually my life story of health and dieting. I was the fat kid. I was the kid that couldn't climb the ropes in gym, found myself working the projector instead of playing on. And of course, back then in the 50s and 60s, early 60s, we didn't have all the dietary advice that we have now. We didn't have the food pyramid. We didn't have the healthy whole grains. We didn't have healthy in front of any food group, pretty much, the word healthy like it is today. We ate food, but there was sugar and there was ice cream and there was treats, and carbs were still considered a treat, although nowhere it wasn't consumed in near the volume of today. But I've been dieting all my life, and I've definitely succeeded. Almost every time I went on a diet, I did have enough willpower. I don't like the traditional dieting. I think it's torture. I think to be hungry all the time, to have cravings is not a way to live. It's a miserable life. And then when you add the misconception of eat less, move more, and you take somebody like me who wasn't athletic and try to work out hard for 3 hours a day, that makes your hunger even worse and your dieting even more miserable. And I don't care how strong a human being you might be, you cannot sustain that for very long. So I'd lose some weight. And then when I'd get where I thought, okay, this is a good weight, I would go off the diet. To me, a diet was something, like you've said this, I've heard you say this, diet is something it's a temporary thing. It's a treatment in order to get better, and you'll get better, and then you won't have to diet anymore. The only problem is when you stop dieting, you start eating all the sugar. The weight comes on faster than you lost it, because the body's tendency, because of a lot of survival genetics, is to hold on to weight, economize the use of energy, adjust the metabolism. This is normal. That's why it's much easier to gain weight than to lose weight, and why when we regain weight, we always gain a little extra, because we feel our inner intelligence, our subconscious, when it experiences something, goes a little overboard to protect you against the next time. We just had a famine. That was pretty rough. Oh, here's food again. That last famine was pretty rough. Let's put a little more away this time for the next famine. And if you don't think that's a common human behavior pattern, look at people with their money. When they got plenty of money in the bank, they spend like crazy. Then they go broke. And then they make a little money again. They're not so quick. They're not so quick to spend it as fast. They can't get out of their head. They remember what it was like to be without money. And if you don't believe that's true, find anybody that survived the Great Depression. They're cheapskates. They're absolute miserly. They won't part with a penny because they remember the bread lines. Maybe not consciously, but it's in there. And that's how our bodies treat energy and have ever since the beginning of life.
But Mitch, what you just said reminded me of something. I think you are probably the only person in the carnivore space talking about this extensively, is the notion of addiction. And you talked about how the body wants to hold on to those carbs longer. And from what I remember you talking about before, this is part of the reason why we crave carbs. Can you elaborate on your understanding of addiction when it comes to why we constantly crave carbs and make it difficult to go on to carnivore?
So you're really telling me you don't have 6 hours to sit here and listen to the rest of my life story?
That just triggered me in a positive way.
Okay, we'll get around to how I discovered carnivore. That's the least. I think that's the least of it. Okay, yeah, I am definitely in the addiction camp. If people, for example, and I know a few people like this that I haven't killed yet, I want to, and those are people who say, I don't know why you have such a tough time avoiding sweets. I don't even like sweets. I don't ever eat sweets. You want to kill these people. You want to strangle them.
I know some of them.
I can understand that because I've never liked alcohol. Never had an attraction for it. Could take it or leave it, but mostly leave it. I could say to an alcoholic the same thing. I don't understand why you can't pass up a bottle, because I don't. But we're all different, and we all have different things that trigger these endorphin releases in us. And that's a whole nother study, a whole nother science, is the science of dopamine, serotonin, endorphin release, the pleasure hormones. I've done a lot of reading and thinking about how those things work. And food addiction is a misnomer. No, I don't think there's any. Everybody talks about food addiction, and I don't think we're addicted to food. I don't think it's food that we're addicted to. I think it's carbohydrates we're addicted to, because a ribeye steak is also food. And I don't know anybody who's a ribeye addict. I don't know anybody that's stealing their mother's jewelry to pawn it to go to Sam's Club and buy a ribeye. I don't know. That is not something you get addicted to. It causes no endorphin rush, no adrenaline rush. You don't get that anticipatory high of the pleasure you're going to get from a ribeye like you do when you're contemplating that bowl of ice cream that you're dishing out for yourself, and your mouth starts watering because all your bodily functions are ramping up. Your cephalic phase responses and things that get your digestive juices flowing. So humans, as Homo sapiens, have lived, and the 3 million years that genus Homo, are Homo habilis and Homo erectus and all the other homos that, I always get a grin when I say that, but all the other species in genus Homo that were humans, they were humans. They were very similar to us.
Right.
When you go back that far, there was no agriculture. They were hunters and gatherers, but they could gather up a limited amount of carbohydrate. And mostly the sweet stuff, the fruits, only were for a couple, 3 weeks a year when they were in season, if they even had them at all. Because most of the time that our species was evolving was during the period where we were migrating into the colder climates. And we became hunters. We got adapted to meat. As we became adapted to meat, our physiology, our genetics, everything, our digestive systems changed. We lost our hind guts, which were connected where our appendix is now. We lost our tails, but we roaming around the Museum of Natural History, the Franklin Institute, looking and studying the bones, talking to the people there about, I put up a video on my channel when whales could walk. It was the most fascinating thing in the world because whales today still have hind legs and the remnants of their hind feet inside them because whales evolved from land animals that went back into the sea. They're marine mammals that were land animals, and then they went back in the sea, and over hundreds of thousands of years or millions of years to a life, but they still have the vestigial remains of their ancestors. And it's a fascinating study, and it's a main study in anthropology where they look at species over time and they see how things actually reposition themselves. Their eyes move apart or together depending on how far down the line. So this stuff is all real, and it is
Right.
science. You can't ignore it. It's logic, and it tells the most amazing story. And people can either believe it or just put their heads in the sand. That's okay. I got off on a tangent. The question was,
Addiction.
okay, yeah, addiction. Yeah, yeah. You know me. If you've watched my live streams, you know that once I get off of a subject, we're going into a whole different town and exploring every alley.
And I love it.
Okay, so I said all that basically to try to support the fact that our ancestors were meat eaters. There's no doubt about it. We are carnivore adapted, and we can eat carbohydrates. Our bodies treat them as survival food that's not usually available, as last resort stuff, as stuff to go scrounging for when the hunt failed or you ran out of meat, out of a source of quick energy that doesn't have a lot of nutrition in it, but it has energy. It has enough to keep you breathing and keep your heart going, and to be made by the human body into fat. That's why bears will gorge on honey
Right.
and other
Yeah.
sweet things before the winter. They get fat, they hibernate.
Survive.
They that's why we have the mechanisms and the physiological pathways to convert carbohydrates into triglycerides into fat. And the whole idea is that fat is our preferred fuel. Fat is what we keep in our gas tank. We don't keep sugar in our gas tank. Our gas tank is all over our body, around our waist. It's the subcutaneous fat or the visceral fat. It's where we store the energy for the long trip. For the short sprint, for the immediate needs, we store our energy in the muscles and the liver as glycogen. No more than 24 hours worth.
Mitch, this may veer a little bit into politics, but what the science, you obviously have a deep understanding of the science around nutrition. You just explained how we developed as meat eaters. And I know you did a wonderful video about Ansel Keys, a wonderful and
Oh,
sad and depressing video. Right.
yeah, I know.
His name, right. In Judaism, we say that on Purim, you say the name Haman and you say blot it out,
Yeah.
everyone boos. So now I guess when we say Ansel Keys, everyone should boo. But aside from Ansel Keys and his sort of perverse influence, how did we end up in this dietary regime in our country where we're 6 to 11 servings of grains a day, where
Yeah.
sugar is preferred over fat? How did we get here?
It's a traditional tale of corruption, greed, and ignorance on top of everything else. And then, of course, once these machines get in place, you end up with an economy where half the people in this country's incomes and livelihoods depend on the perpetuation of the stuff that's killing us. Think about this. If everybody stopped eating sugar tomorrow, half the country would be unemployed. Half the medical profession, half the hospitals would close. We'd go into a tailspin. We'd have completed economic collapse because our current economy, has been built around all of this. And all of this came from, like most things, one or two key turning points, of which Ansel Keys was one, and so was Ellen G. White back in the late 1800s, and John Harvey Kellogg, and that was a chain, but that was a separate thing from Ansel Keys. That was a religious influence that pretty well started the vegetarian movement, the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And of course, we're set up so it's so politically incorrect to attack any organ of religion. You just don't do that. So these, even though the damage that they've done was enormous, in fact, they were one of the first that started the ball rolling. We can't publicly talk about that because it just isn't done. It's political. You started with a woman in the mid to late latter part of the 1800s who hurt her head, was in a coma, should not eat meat because meat causes evil thoughts and makes men masturbate.
Right.
She then came out of her coma and decided that she was the new Messiah. And she had 2,000 conversations with God, and she had to get them written down. And she had to get them written down in a hurry. So there was this 18-year-old kid named John Kellogg who went to work for her as an editor, and he would edit her writings. And they formed quite a close relationship. They all formed the Seventh-day Adventist Church. She then sent John Kellogg to medical school. And the Seventh-day Adventists paid for his medical school. When we got out of medical school, he was Dr. John Harvey Kellogg. And they all had their ideas about how men should eat and how clean they should eat and how they should be eating vegetables and how many stools they should have and what color their stools should be and how many enemas they should have a day and how they should avoid sex and masturbation. And so they decided, and the Seventh-day Adventists purchased what became the Battle Creek Sanitarium. And who'd they put in charge but Dr. John Harvey Kellogg. And John Kellogg and his brother decided that breakfast cereal was a food that was going to keep men from having evil thoughts, and they invented Kellogg's. They started Kellogg's, and the rest is history. And the rest is history. I don't know. You can't undo that now.
No. And then breakfast is the most important meal of the day is an advertising jingle.
Yeah. That was John Harvey. That was John Kellogg's slogan. He made that up. He was the first person to say, breakfast is useless. You don't need breakfast.
So then, Mitch, knowing how this has permeated our culture, that we are fighting an uphill battle as carnivores, even as the carnivore diet catches on, which is wonderful, so many cultural forces arrayed against us. What do you think, as someone who is an observer of the human condition, you can tell as much as your personal story as you like. You've been in business, you've dealt with people. What character traits do you see in successful carnivores? Like what allows certain people to succeed and to be able to resist sort of the siren song of popular culture, and what leads people to fail? What makes the difference?
I don't want to lose any of my viewers and insult anybody or anything, and I hate to say this because it sounds so elitist. I think it takes a certain level of intelligence, brain power, IQ, computer hardware in your head, processing power. Jordan Peterson talks a lot about this now, and he's very unpopular when he does. He basically talks about why people succeed, and he talks all about IQ and how when people have some people they may be wonderful people and they may do great things, they may have great jobs and make a lot of money, but they can't grasp certain concepts. So I think that
independence of thought. I agree with you on IQ, but there are plenty of really smart people that are high IQs, let's say, who are
their brain, and that's possible, but that was the first part of it. It takes brain power and it takes an open mind. It takes an open mind, and it almost takes a little bit of anti-social or anti-government and anti-establishment backbone in you. Contrarian. You have to be a contrarian. I've been sure that it's wrong. This has been said by so many smart, brilliant financial investors. And contrarianism in the financial markets is a thing. When everybody in the market got the message that interest rates are going up and everybody throws their money long into the bond market, that's when you know to sell. As soon as everybody, and they have indexes, contrarian indexes. And when I was trading, I traded on those indexes. I because people like to be led and they like to take advice. And it takes almost a free thinker to be able to accept this and succeed on it. And the reason you have to be a free thinker and you have to have confidence in what you believe and what you've learned, especially because everybody from your doctor to your mother-in-law is trying to tell you you're killing yourself and you're crazy. And don't you know it? Everybody knows meat causes heart attacks. Everybody knows that fat makes you fat. Everybody. And it turns out there's so much evidence to the contrary. And that's when we get, if the evidence is there, how come everybody doesn't know it? And the reason is because of who controls the messaging. Where do we get our messages from? We get them from social media. We get them from the mainstream news media. We get them from our government agencies. We get them from the USDA. We get them from these corrupt associations like the American Diabetes Association, the American Heart Association. These people are owned, bought, and paid for by the big food and pharma companies. Okay.
So here's a more philosophical question then. Obviously, some people are born with an independent streak. And I know you've talked about that in some of your videos. You've always been someone who's been a contrarian. In some ways, I have too. I've always been someone who wanted to think for myself. And I remember my grandpa saying, the majority is usually wrong. I always remember that. But this probably has little to do with carnivore, but do you think people can develop that trait over time? Can people become more independent, or is this just something you're born with?
I don't know if you're born with it, but I think that it's something that develops early in your life. A combative spirit, a spirit not wanting to go along with the crowd. It's the thing that annoys. If you're a parent with young children and you've got one or two kids that just annoy the hell out of you, chances are those kids are going to really do great in life. If you got a kid that just goes along with everything, I don't think it's going to turn out that good. I'm not a child psychologist, but I've been around a long time and I see and I've observed an awful lot. So being combative sometimes is a good thing. And I've always been that way.
Yeah. I think that is one beautiful part about the carnivore community is that as you begin to meet people and on your channel, you do live streams and you have a community of people that Thursday night for community members, these are great people. They may be, they're combative in a wonderful way. It's combative in search of the truth. I think in Judaism, there's something called arguments for the sake of heaven. So this is the idea that when you argue with each other, you actually find truth. Now, there are arguments for the sake of power. Those are the negative kind of arguments. That's where someone just wants power or money or just to say, hey, I'm right and you're wrong. But then there are arguments for the sake of truth. That's where you have independence. You really look at the evidence and you decide not based on marketing, not based on conformity, but based on what is true. And I think that's, as you said, that desire is something that I think can lead people to the carnivore diet. If you have somebody for the first time, let's say you meet somebody, they don't really know anything about the carnivore diet, they've heard of it, and they say, I'm really interested in trying it. What's your advice? What do you tell them? How do you get started, and how do you succeed with it?
Well, you're talking to somebody that has absolutely never succeeded successfully in converting or getting anybody to stick to a carnivore diet that's not following me on YouTube. And I've tried maybe 10, 15, maybe even 20 times to talk to people. First of all, if they don't come to you, I don't care how much you love them. I don't care if they're your mother, your father, your kids. If they don't see, holy cow, Evan, what the hell happened to you? Look at you. You used to weigh 600 pounds and now look at you, 135 pounds. How'd you do it? If you don't have an opening like that, you don't stand a chance. The second thing is if you have an opening like that, because we should be trying to help people who want to know.
Yes.
You can't oversell it. You have to be a smart salesman, and it's tough because we're so enthusiastic. I know I am.
100%.
We're just so enthusiastic about what benefits we've gotten from this that you just want to go out, stand on some hill somewhere and shout it to the world. But the world's not ready for it. The world has been, indoctrinated and preconditioned for so long, for 70, 60, 70, 80 years, hearing that same healthy fruits and vegetables, healthy whole grains, fat is causes this clogs up your arteries, cholesterol. We won't even talk. We can't even get into cholesterol now because that's just a whole nother branch of the fraud, of the misconception. So we'll keep it to sugar in this one. I know I had said a few minutes ago that we were talking about addiction. I want to get back to one point, and I said there's no such thing as food addiction, and I want to make sure it's clear. We should stop using that word. We should say carbohydrate addiction. We are addicted. Carbohydrates, our body treats like a drug.
Yes.
They treat the other foods like nutrients. And it's a high energy survival food to eat when there is no other food. And I want to get this out because this is one of the main cruxes of why we are addicted. And I never got to finish this path. We're going down some philosophical paths now, but I never got to finish this thought. Since the sugar was a survival food, our bodies and in our subconscious and in our programming, we knew that it wasn't really available. There were no 7-Elevens in for it. And what you found was grubby a lot of times. You had to dig up roots and tubers. You had to eat sour little berries, and you had to know which ones you could eat because so many of the plants are just deadly poisonous. Blueberries and things like that. That it became a survival advantage for the animal to gorge when they found any source or any supply of these. In other words, basically eat as much as you can. Your body will turn it into fat. That will help your long-term survival chances. And that's why today we experience an incredibly different response when we eat carbs than we do when we eat fat and protein. When we eat fat and protein, our normal satiety hormones get triggered. Our fat cells release leptin. We get to a point where after a pound or a pound and a half of steak, you go, oh, okay, I just can't eat another bite right now. I may not even eat till tomorrow. You just get satisfied. When's the last time that happened to you over a bowl of pasta? It
Doesn't.
doesn't. It doesn't. That stuff will not by default trigger that leptin response. It will trigger other responses. Your hunger will never get satisfied. You will get more hungry. This is why half an hour, like Chinese food, they always say you're always hungry an hour later because there was nothing in that Chinese food
Nothing.
to trigger a leptin release from your fat cells to satiate you, to do all those things. So when
Do you
you eat
think this is the main reason people generally lose weight on carnivore? Is they're just more satiated? Is that the main explanation?
well, of course, and you're eating nutrients. Mostly, you're not eating all energy. When you eat carbohydrates, you're eating just about pure energy. It's not used as building materials for the body. Whereas when you eat fat and protein, most of that is not used for energy by the body. The proteins are broken down into amino acids. Amino acids aren't part of the energy supply chain in our mitochondria. That's not where those materials come from. The amino acids are used to rebuild proteins, new proteins in the body for whatever proteins do. And there's 25,000 different proteins coded for in our DNA. We have 25,000 genes in our chromosomes that code for 25,000 different proteins. And some of these proteins join with other proteins and create different things. And they all create little molecular machinery, real machines that move and do things. If you study molecular biology at some of these fabulous machines, especially some of those in the electron transport chain, ATP synthase, the end of the transport chain that actually creates ATP molecules, which are the energy currency of the body. And everything that runs in our body uses this ATP as currency. At the end of the electron transport chain is this monstrous chemical machine with a rotating spindle in it that goes at 100,000 RPM.
Yeah,
And
it's amazing.
every cell in our body in every cell, in every mitochondria, in every cell. There are hundreds of those little molecular machines. They're running. There are other molecular machines that look like they have feet on them. And they walk up and down, they run up and down microtubules. And what they do in every cell is they're responsible for pulling apart the nucleus and when cells divide into two. They're responsible in muscle fibers for moving things. When you move your finger like this, these little machines are running up and down along fibers in your body at a molecular level, a level too small to even see. So
Mm.
the fascination I have for the intricacy of this machinery and how it works leads you to logical conclusions about what does it need. We all know that our car needs an oil change every once in a while or it's going to blow up. But what do these machines need? And the answer is that the single most important thing that all of our molecular machinery needs is nutrition, is
Mm.
the
Mm.
molecules of whatever it is they need to do the job they have to do. And
Mm.
that's where the meat comes in. The meat has everything. If you're going to be
Yeah.
eating vegetables, you're going to have a closet full of supplements. And you're going to have to be a genius to figure out exactly how much of what you need every day. It's not worth it. It's so simple. Eat the meat. The machinery pretty much designed itself around the fuel that was available for it.
Mm.
So the meat came first before we became the humans that we are today. And we adapted all of our machinery to that fuel. It's like same thing with a car. You
Mm.
could start out building a car and you could say, I'm going to build a gasoline car. I don't want to build a diesel car. So you start with gasoline and diesel and you build the car and adapt the way the engine runs, the way it's ported, the way the timing works. One of them is built to run on the diesel and the other is built to run on the gasoline. And if you try to run the gas after it's already developed and it's fine tuned and it's working perfectly, if you put the diesel in the gasoline car, it's not going to run. If you put the gasoline in the diesel car, it's not going to run. They're both perfectly good cars. Wrong fuel. The right fuel for the human body is protein and fat. The best kind of
Mm.
protein from the best kind of animals. That's a problem today too with all the regenerative farming, with raping of the soil. So yeah, we have to supplement a little. But it's all
Yeah.
so simple and it's also elegant in its
Yes.
simplicity and
Yeah.
logic and common sense that
The
this
simplicity is one of my favorite things about this
uh,
way of eating. It is. You go ahead, Mitch. Yeah.
and I was going to say, and this is where it takes somebody that has an open mind and is willing to cast off some of these results of some of their brainwashing that they believe is true. And it's tough when somebody incorporates a belief into their ideology. Those things aren't easy to change. We all have our beliefs in virtually everything. Political beliefs, religious about how things work. To overcome that once it becomes ideology is tough. In the ideal world, a human being would be born, be breastfed for the first years of its life, weaned off of breast food, meat. There's a reason why kids fight you when you want them to eat vegetables. There's a reason for that. All this stuff is obvious and it's logical. You give a kid a rib, give him a barbecued pork rib. Kid will, same thing with a dog. We all have dogs. Throw the dogs meat scraps. The dogs go nuts.
Love it.
You, they love it. And then we say in our infinite wisdom, oh, don't give that to the dog. It's going to clog up its arteries. So
Yeah.
how do you get the message? You don't, because see, we don't control, and I was going there before, we don't control the messaging.
Yeah. Yeah. We
You
don't.
have a medical community and a government agencies and all these advisory associations whose livelihood and very existence depends on the status quo of maintaining all the good old boy connections that they have, of all the employees of the huge factories that produce this stuff, and of all the money that they're making. And it's generational. It's going to take generations to change these things. So for me, I hide and do the best I can for myself. And I go on YouTube and got a community together, which is, when you think about it, it's very tiny. It's very tiny compared to some of the other communities on YouTube that are involved in like cell phones and photography and
Right.
social media and millions of views on a video. We get a few hundred and we're tickled to death. But for those people, we're doing more for those people than all the doctors on the planet are
100%.
doing for their patients. And yet we still need the doctors. I had brain surgery because I hit my head and I ended up with a subdural hematoma, but that's a mechanical thing.
That's
We
right.
need doctors
That's
for
right.
that. We need doctors when we break things to put us back together. I broke my wrist, fell off a ladder. I needed to get like screws in it. So that's,
Yeah.
but don't tell me, don't tell me that what drugs I need to take to regulate my hundreds of millions of year old physiology that developed over eons of time. You don't understand. They don't understand it. And my doctor, she's great. She knows I know more than she does about this stuff. But she's not a real doctor. She's a nurse practitioner at the VA. So I don't have that ego. I don't have that long white
Good.
coat with the stethoscope draped over it.
How has the carnivore diet, you speak about this so eloquently. Obviously, you call it old guy carnivore, so you're in your elderly years. How has the carnivore diet and your YouTube channel changed your life? What has it brought to you? Is this a wonderful phase of life? Talk about the experience of starting a YouTube channel, of being a
Oh,
carnivore,
wow.
of building up a community.
I had a YouTube channel. And I can't get into my entire history now, but I've had a very checkered history of success and failure because I've always been on the cutting edge of everything I've ever done. When you're on the cutting edge, sometimes you bleed. And unfortunately, things in the world change so fast that even no matter how smart you are, no matter how good, I tell people this, I say, I don't care how good a swimmer you are, when a 5,000-foot wave comes along in a tsunami, your swimming ability isn't going to help you very much. So I had built some very successful businesses exactly at the wrong time. In 2000, I was there for the 1980 crash where the savings loan, I was in the building business, home building business, when the savings loan all crashed in the late 80s, they all went broke and the government took over all the foreclosures. And that was a real mess. And I was also there in 2008 when the economy, it's just, there's nothing you can do. It's a tsunami of things that just, you're standing there alone on an island after everything around you is washed away. There aren't a lot of customers left. And I've always picked myself up until about 10 years ago when I finally had it. I have a video about my restaurant, and that was a victim of the 2008 failure and of corrupt real estate developers and people who, and they tell you it's not personal, it's just business. What a cop out that is. Everything is personal, I tell them. You
Yes.
take a guy's livelihood away, you steal all his money, that's personal. I don't care what you tell me, it's business, it's personal. And that's the same attitude that all the people who work in these drug companies and in the medical community, they're nice people and they're charitable and they're personal until it starts to cost them money. And then all of a sudden it's not personal, it's business. We're killing you. We're feeding you stuff that's rotting you from the inside and poisoning you slowly over 30, 40 years that will end up with you as a full-blown diabetic and your feet and toes cut off. But it's just business. We have the ability to rationalize, and no matter
Oh, look
how
at the
evil and
Holocaust.
bad, we can do that. We can rationalize
Yeah.
anything, which is how come we can rationalize eating that gallon of ice cream when we know we want to lose weight. We have that ability. And it's in our subconscious. It controls us. We have no conscious control. Anybody who thinks they have willpower is deluding themselves. And there's a evolutionary root in that behavior too. There is a reason for every behavioral pattern that humans have that is rooted in something that benefited survival at some point, because that's how evolution works. If it aids in survival, it gets passed on. If it is either does nothing or harmful, that branch goes extinct. And that's how, and we call it survival of the fittest, and even that is a misnomer. And I could talk for hours about why that's a misnomer. You can be fit for one environment and totally unsuited for another. And
So what about this phase of life? So what about now?
okay, so
You've built
me,
up.
okay, yeah, here I
Yeah.
go. Okay, so 10 years ago, I was 67 years old. I'll be 77 in a couple of weeks. So I'm 67 years old, lost everything, My last hurrah was the restaurant. I had to walk away from that. I'm living over in Orlando. My house is in foreclosure. I'm depressed. I'm eating emotionally, and I'm ready to give up. I'm ready to get. I was this far from suicide. Really, I just was at a point where after the life I'd had and all the work that I'd done and all the successes and the money I'd made, and the mansions and Rolls Royces and my own airplanes and a yacht 53. I had a life like people only dream of, and only to keep losing it and having to start over again. I said, that's it. I'm 67. I don't have another start left in me. And my kids came to the rescue. I'm not ashamed to tell this story. My son came over and he said, I can't stand to see you like this, Pop. He said to me, you're the strongest man I know. I said, not anymore. So he lived on the river here on the coast. He had a beautiful house on the intercoastal. And they had bought the house next door. My son's very successful. They bought the house next door as an investment. He said, why don't you come over and live in that house next door? So I moved over here. I had nothing going on over there anymore. I moved over here and I moved into the house next door, and I started to relax and then started to enjoy life. The old Mitch came back and I started thinking I need to be in business here. I said, I've got Social Security. That's not enough. I can't live on my kids' charity here. So I started trying to pay my son rent, or at least something. And I started a cigar business with another guy. Next thing I know, we're in the cigar business. And then, true to form for me, we got a cigar company. I was selling them online. I know how to program. I know how to do websites. So I started this mail order cigar business. We started doing okay. We had a factory down in the Dominican Republic. I have YouTube videos out there. Palomino
You
cigars.
showed one of them the other
Yeah,
night
you can see
at
there's
the
3
live.
videos. You'll
Yeah.
see me running around, and this was after the 10-year crash. And then the government comes along again and turns the regulation of the cigar industry over to the Food and Drug Administration, who decides they're going to regulate cigars like drugs. And pretty much at the time, we anticipate that they were going to put us all out of business because somebody somewhere decided that kids were smoking cigars. I've never seen a kid walking down the street smoking a $15 El Rey del Mundo. I said, nah, it's not worth the risk. Can't do it. So now I'm out of business again. And I got interested in drones because model airplanes has always been a hobby of mine. And I said, I'm going to start a drone photography business. So I went and got my FAA Part 107. And I bought some drones and I started doing some photography. And then I said, oh, maybe I should start a drone channel. I must be the oldest guy on the planet flying these drones. So I'll call my channel Old Guy and a Drone. That was in 2018. And that's where the old guy part of it came from. And this channel that I have now, Old Guy Carnivore, is that same channel. I just changed the name. So if you go into my channel and you start thumbing backwards in the uploads in the videos, you'll go all the way back to 2018 and see all kinds of Mitch flying drones and doing live streams. And that kind of brought me back to life. And then the federal government comes along and decides that drones are dangerous and we need to create a ton of new regulations. And they pretty much killed the whole drone industry and the hobby of model airplanes with the Part 107 crap. And so again, I said, there's no fun in this anymore. And now they have a thing called remote ID, where whenever you're flying a drone, you're mandated to be broadcasting not only the drone's location, but the pilot's location. So all of these Karens are running up, yelling at people, are you spying on me with your drone? Are you photographing me laying out by my pool? And my answer to them was, ma'am, you weigh 450 pounds. You're the last thing I want to photograph from my drone. So that was the end of the drones. And that was at that point, I'm on a keto diet. This is all going to come together. I promise you. It all comes together. I'm on a keto diet. I'm doing pretty good. I'm working out. I'm in the gym. I overdo it. I just overdo it. You ever do that? Just work out too hard.
Oh,
You get
many
lightheaded.
times.
Okay. And then I went into the sauna, which at this gym was 170 degrees. Went into the sauna, got talking to another guy in the sauna about nothing other than keto. Ended up staying in the sauna for about 45 minutes without realizing it. So not only was I dehydrated, overheated, overworked. Anyway, I stood up. I really felt felt like I was going to die. I get back to my locker. I said, and I've had that happen to me a couple of times in my life where I just overdid it so much, like heat exhaustion almost. I just said, I got to lay down. I laid down on the bench next to my locker. And I lay there for about 5 minutes and I was still awake. And I said, okay, I think I could probably get up now. And that's the last thing I remember. The next thing I knew, I woke up in the emergency room. About an hour and a half later, my son was sitting there. What happened? You passed out. You hit your head on the bench on the way down. You've got a brain bleed. I said, oh, they may have to take you for surgery. They didn't. They left me in the hospital overnight. They let me go the next day. I thought everything was fine. But over the next 6 or 7 weeks, all of a sudden, I start getting symptoms, stroke-like symptoms, aphasia, numbness in my hands and feet.
Mm.
I was on the phone with my son, who happens to be on the board of directors at one of the local hospitals here. I was on the phone with him, and all this thick in my head, pressing on my brain, and they needed. So we fly over to this hospital. That was a $21,000 helicopter ride for 3 minutes, by the way. And they take me down to intensive care. And I see the surgeon, and he tells me they're going to have to do a craniotomy, which means they cut a piece of your skull away. And we have to remove that hematoma, or you could die, or you don't have to do the surgery. And there's a 50% chance it might resolve itself. Now they leave you to make these choices.
I know.
Like you're not going to hire the surgeon. Like you're going to say, 50-50 that I'll die. I'll take that. No. So the next morning, I have brain surgery, and I was having real balance issues, but it took me a month or two to recover about 90%, and it took me almost a year to recover 100%. Long story short, if it isn't too late for that, I got my drone flying suffered because I had balance. And when you put on a pair of goggles, a lot of people get dizzy in those goggles, even if they're perfectly healthy. When you're prone to imbalance, you can really get dizzy when you're flying a racing drone going 100 miles an hour underneath park benches and around trees and things. I laid off the drones, and the drone channel on YouTube just went dormant. I did one video after the surgery. It was called I'm Back, and it's still there, where I do a live stream and I show people this baseball looking scar because it had staples in it. I got back to the gym, started working out, learned about carnivore, started watching the usual suspects, Ken Berry, Sean Baker, Anthony Chafee, and those guys. I'd already been keto. I already knew about carnivore. I already knew that you shouldn't be eating carbs. I've been low carb since Atkins in 1973. I bought the, remember, you don't remember, but you think they vilified us today. You should have heard what they were doing to Atkins back then. They were lauding and praising and giving awards to guys like Ansel Keys, who were the real culprits, and the real heroes like Robert Atkins. They wanted to put him in jail for killing people, but that's normal. So I decided that I would just go very low carb, and I lost weight, but I still couldn't kick the addictions. And I went with blueberries because they're probably, of all the fruits you can eat, probably the least harmful. But I liked ice cream. When I ate, and I would go to Aldi's or Costco or Sam's and buy a 3-pound bag of frozen blueberries, and I'd get heavy whipping cream, okay? And I got one of these little magic bullet blenders, and I take one of the little cups and I put the blueberries in the cup, and I'd put the whipping cream in there because the thing only had maybe 10 grams of carbs in this whole thing. And I'm going to make myself a little dish of ice cream. So I'm going to have my ice cream, even though I'm on this ketovore. This is before they called it ketovore, but a very low carb keto diet. But I can have this little treat. No, I would never failed. I would eat that little bowl of ice cream. I would swear to myself, Mitch, you're not a kid. You're a strong man. You're 75 years old. You have willpower. If you say you're only going to have one cup of this ice cream, then by God, that's what I'm going to have. No doubt. I promised myself. I promise. That's the same thing as saying, I promise I will start the diet again on Monday. No, maybe the first of the month. I'm going to, no, maybe after the first of the year. It'll be my New Year's. That is the way our subconscious manipulates our rationalization process. Never, ever did I ever succeed in eating just one cup. I would consume the entire 3 pounds
Yep.
of blueberries. And if I hadn't, and then I would have to fight not to get in my car, find some all night drugstore where I could get some more sugar, like ice cream or something to eat. And sometimes I did that too. And yet, before I ate that one little dish of blueberries, I probably could have avoided it. Once I got triggered by the sweet taste and the dopamine starts flowing and the serotonin starts flowing. Some of the latest research is showing that it's not the reward that we're addicted to. It's the anticipation.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the chase is more satisfying than the sex was to get the hunter out of bed to go get food. It wasn't the eating food that got him out of bed. It was the dopamine and the endorphin rush of the anticipation of the urge, the necessity to go get it, anticipating the reward while you're getting it, but you're pushed to get it. It is this that is where our addictions come from. They're
Right.
all rooted in some ancient need that at one time was a survival benefit. We have the mechanisms in our subconscious that can control us. Our conscious mind doesn't stand a chance, which is why animals don't do screwy things, because they have no conscious mind to get in the way. Every animal knows he behaves exactly the way he's supposed to because he's not thinking about it. It's all instinctual. We are underneath this thin veil of consciousness that we have, this new kid on the block in evolutionary biology. We are animals underneath, and our main brain, our subconscious, the brain that controls all the chemistry, all the heart beating, all the breathing, all the muscular movement, all the things that happen autonomously that we don't have to consciously think about. That brain controls everything. And our little subconscious brain is like one little skinny guy sitting at a computer console in front of the largest supercomputer in the world, giving it suggestions of what it might do.
Fantastic. Mitch, I want to ask you a closing question, because this is one of my favorite things that you do on your videos is you end them in a wonderful way. You say, take the rest of the day off and eat meat. Where does that come from?
It's funny. If you look at my old drone videos, even from 6 years ago, you'll see I ended every video with take the rest of the day off and go play with your drones. I have always, all my life, gone for the laugh. I've always tried to make people feel good. I don't care who they are or where they are. I am one of the tens of thousands of unemployed comedians currently alive and well in this country. I always say it's my dark sense of humor that kept me from killing myself way back then. I can find humor in a funeral. I can find humor in anything, and you have to be able to laugh at anything, which means you can't take anything too seriously or yourself. So one of the ways that I always used to get a smile out of people and get a laugh out of them, and I've been doing this all my life, is if I go to a store or a waitress or a bank teller or anybody and I'm finished, we're done, I say, take the rest of the day off.
Clever.
And they smile, and then they'll come back and they'll say, I say, okay, you can take the rest of the day off now. Oh, I couldn't do that. I go, what do you mean? Why not? My boss won't let you go right in there and you tell your boss that I said it was okay. And the next thing you know, I got a friend for life. And I've never failed. I've never failed to get a smile with that. And I just started doing it. And it just came out in my first drone video. Got the end of the video. All right, I'm done. Hey, take the rest of the day off and go play with your drones. And that turned into take the rest of the day off and eat meat. But that's where that came from.
I love it. I love it. In that spirit, Mitch, you have shared so much wisdom with us and stories, and I think one of the reasons that your YouTube channel is so successful and that so many people love learning from you is your just utter honesty and connection. Not only it's honesty combined with deep knowledge and wisdom and bringing it all together. And I am so grateful for that, and I'm grateful for the time that we've had together and the opportunity to continue learning from you. So thank you for sharing your time with me and my audience. And in the words of the great old guy carnivore, take the rest of the day off and eat meat.
Thank you.